and gentlemen, and welcome to this very special segment on the 6th day of September. Well, it is 22 degrees and mostly sunny. In Brisbane, looking wonderful at this time of the year. I hope you all had a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Well, let's get into the news. Let's begin today with some good news. Well, it's not always that we have news like this, but this is a very good news coming out of Cambridge. Have a look at this.
There's a lot of red on that map. Next, an ornately sculpted stone gateway from India has been saved from being put in a skip and now has a new home in Cambridge.
It was rescued from a Hindu temple which closed and was bought for only £1. Today, it was officially unveiled in a public park on the city's Mill Road. Stuart Leiths has the full story.
We have stoneworkers moulded by hand in India, Rajasthan.
This intricately carved stone gateway nearly ended up in a skip when its original home, a Hindu temple in Cambridge, was closed. But then Piero D'Angelico, who's a hairdresser with a salon on the city's Mill Road, stepped in to save it. And today, at the official unveiling, his efforts to find it a new home were recognised.
When I heard about the Bhavat Bhavan carved stone that were going to be skipped, I reacted straight away to save it. I had no clue, what I was going to go through, but my first mission was to save it. The second stage, to relocation, that was a mission. But I tell you what, the journey was fantastic.
Piero bought it from the county council for only £1, and then local businesses came together to fund its renovation. And they had to find a new site for it, finally getting planning permission to place it in this public park on Mill Road. The reconstruction work was carried out by stonemasons from Apex Stone, who are based near Cambridge.
It's a different shape to what it was previously, so we had to carve some extra bits to go on it, some extra bits of carving around the top and the sides to make it into a rectangle. It was previously flat, so challenging, but rewarded.
Among those attending today's ceremony was sculptor Stephen Cox, who is a member of the Royal Academy of Arts.
It's a superb piece of carving and representative of this extraordinary craft skills that emanate from India. As you know the story, he bought it for £1, and someone told me, well, it's been valued for current positioning over £1 million. So that's what happens, it's an extraordinary thing to have happened.
Now the gateway from India, as it's known, is officially open. It's in a place where anyone can come to see it and spend time in quiet contemplation, admiring the skill of the Indian stonemasons who carved it. Stuart Leiths, ITV News, Cambridge.
Isn't that wonderful, a hairdresser, although from you who thought that it should not go to waste, and good on him, and what a great effort to put it all together now in Cambridge. People will go and see that. Well, right now, pressure is mounting on the Qatar Airways block decision.
A golfing fanatic and a defence minister who's adept at fairway diplomacy. Richard Marles was already under pressure over his VIP frequent flyer status. The coalition now questioning his carry-on.
Can the minister confirm whether he has taken his golf clubs with him on any defence VIP special purpose aircraft flights, and if so, on how many flights?
Every place I have been, everything I have done has been in pursuit of my duties as the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
And then taking a swing at the opposition leader as a fellow special purpose flight enthusiast.
My office has logged numerous requests from the Leader of the Opposition about him going on special purpose aircraft, including in the last 6 weeks 2 times at least in writing to go to a game of the Matildas.
Order.
Air travel is proving to be turbulent territory for the federal government, with Labor now under mounting pressure to review a decision by the Transport Minister to quash a request from Qatar Airways for additional weekly flights into Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, claiming it was in the national interest.
Will the Prime Minister detail discussions he or his office has had with Qantas CEO Alan Joyce concerning the Sweetheart deal that has blocked Qatar Airways?
It's very easy to assume that this government is continuing to run a protection racket for the most complained about company in our country.
But for now, the Prime Minister is holding firm.
Global aviation is not a free-for-all. We have the most open aviation market in the world, bar none. Bar none. There isn't another country in the world that has the access that we do.
A rough landing to start the sitting week. Dana Morse, ABC News, Canberra.
Well, a rough landing and Qantas is more in news, but not always for the very good reasons. Well, right now, Ben Hart breaks the silence on the Western Australia's scrapped cultural heritage reform.
In government, Ben Wyatt led the charge for reforms to WA's Aboriginal cultural heritage laws after the destruction of Juukan Gorge.
Juukan reinforces why Western Australia's Aboriginal heritage protection system needs to be overhauled.
And continued to defend them in the face of growing criticism. He's been silent since they were scrapped by the Premier, but campaigning for the voice to Parliament acknowledged the backflip was almost inevitable.
In the end, the consensus fractured, and you need a consensus to make this kind of reform. So I'm not surprised the government made the decision it did.
As the end of the laws neared, it was farmers and pastoralists who were the biggest critics, something the former Aboriginal Affairs Minister says he found surprising.
I was disappointed, of course, because I thought after a lot of work, 4 years of work, where we had a consensus from the pastoralists, the farmers, the prospectors, the miners. Very rare that you get a consensus on a good outcome, but ultimately, clearly the regulations went too far.
We were asked to support the Cultural Heritage Act based on the intent, and we were promised with the details later, and we saw how that went. With the voice, similarly, the community is crying out for further details.
A month on, the focus is now on the October 14 referendum.
A yes vote shapes the system up in Aboriginal policy and ensures that we get a much better outcome in the implementation and development of policy. The only thing you're going to see for those people who aren't directly engaged is a better spend of the taxpayers' dollar.
There are already a number of different advisory groups and bodies that inform governments on better outcomes for Aboriginal people. What we need is for the federal government and the state government to actually listen to those concerns.
In just over a month, voters will decide if they agree. Kean Burke, ABC News.
And as the pressure grows and the pressure mounts, the date is getting closer, I think the campaign is getting intense as well. So, either yes or no, the choice is yours, but you better be well informed. Well, right now let's go to ICT, where the Catholic Church slams ICT government for taking over Calvary Hospital.
In an inquiry into a bill the ACT government says is an attempt to undermine territory rights, the Catholic Church made no bones about its position.
Self-government in the ACT is not a right, it is a determination of this Parliament.
This is the first time in 200 years that we've ever seen anything like this.
The ACT government took control of the former Calvary Public Hospital in Bruce in July, after the Legislative Assembly passed enabling legislation in May. A federal opposition push for a Senate inquiry into the compulsory acquisition was voted down, so Queensland LNP Senator Matt Canavan proposed an amendment to the self-government bill, which would require the ACT government itself to hold an inquiry. That proposal was referred to a committee, which last night held a public hearing.
How do you feel being told after 50 odd years of providing services to Canberrans that, hey, you've got 6 weeks to leave?
Yeah, Senator, I can talk about how I personally feel and then the commentary from our staff. And Calvary has faithfully worked with, as a partner, the ACT government for 34 years.
Well, I don't think that the Canberra community learned anything new at the inquiry hearing last night. This whole process has been a stunt from start to finish.
The ACT government denies there's been a lack of transparency.
The other relevant committees have always been free to undertake an inquiry, and the ACT government has not sought to avoid scrutiny.
One jurisdiction should not be in a position to dictate what another self-governing jurisdiction does.
Senator Canavan's bill isn't expected to pass the federal parliament. Nevertheless, the Senate committee is due to report its findings tomorrow. Harry Frost, ABC News, Canberra.
So there you are from Canberra. Let's go to New South Wales, where the government is going to extend Australia's budget on coal power plants.
On the shores of Lake Macquarie, the Eraring Power Station produces about 20% of the state's energy needs. There are renewable projects in the pipeline to replace it, but with less than 2 years until Eraring plans to bow out, a government report warns not enough clean generation may be ready in time.
I'm not willing to gamble the reliability and cost pressures of New South Wales consumers and households and businesses on a hunch.
The report recommends that the government speaks with Eraring's owner, Origin Energy, about keeping the coal-fired generator running beyond its planned August 2025 retirement.
I can't give you a time and I can't give you a cost. What I can tell you is that I don't want taxpayers to pay 1 cent more than they need to.
The government claims Origin has a commercial motive to keep Eraring open because it has a large customer base it can't yet supply without it.
If those renewable energy projects don't come online, then Origin does have the opportunity to make some of those profits.
Origin says it will engage with the government to find an acceptable path forward that can help navigate the economic challenges facing the plant.
Well, effectively, what Origin are asking for is for the government to pay for all the coal that goes into the power station so that they can make super profits.
Former Energy Minister Matt Keane claims he was briefed that keeping Eraring running could cost taxpayers $3 billion. The current Energy Minister says she hasn't seen that figure.
To some extent, this is how much insurance does the government want to take out against the risks.
The Energy Minister won't say when the government plans to reach a decision about Eraring. She insists any extension would not prevent New South Wales from reaching its emissions targets. Alexander Lewis, ABC News.
So there you go, a lot of fire in that coal. Well, right now, we're all talking about the referendum. Here's a little clip of what you really need to know.
Well, Australians are set to go back to the polls in a matter of months.
The Prime Minister has revealed more details about the upcoming Voice to Parliament referendum.
The voice to Parliament.
The first major hurdle to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament has been overcome.
Here's a question that every Australian of voting age will have to answer this year. A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? It's a big question, but your answer will be as simple as yes or no. It's a question that for many poses a few more questions, like what is an Indigenous voice? And why is it up to us to decide whether or not it exists?
All of us will have an equal say. All of us can own an equal share of what I believe will be an inspiring and unifying Australian moment.
While there's a lot of talk about the voice, things aren't necessarily getting any clearer.
Support for an Indigenous voice to Parliament has stalled.
I mean, all people are asking for is to have a say.
We don't need a voice, we need ears.
The confusion comes into it when we're not quite sure what the powers will be.
And the power that's given to the voice is to make representations.
And the Prime Minister has gone down a path where he sees political opportunity and an attempt to wedge, and I don't think that's in our country's best interests.
This is a once-in-a-generation chance.
So before you vote, it's a good idea to know what's at stake. Here's everything you need to know about the voice. Let's start with the basics. The plan is to put the voice in the Constitution, the document that outlines how Australia is governed. To do anything to the Constitution, there has to be a national vote, the referendum. As a country, we don't change the Constitution often. In fact, we've only tried 44 times in our history, on everything from the railway disputes to local government to the length of parliamentary terms.
If they change the Constitution,
they're stuck with that for a long time. It's entrenched there and it's very hard to remove. And that makes people very wary of voting for change.
2023 will be the first time in nearly 30 years that we've had a referendum. Your vote will decide whether there should be a group of Indigenous Australians who advise the government on the issues that affect them and their communities. But why do people want a voice in the first place? Since Federation, most governments have struggled to make decisions that improve the lives of Indigenous people. Take the White Australia policy or the Stolen Generations. They were actually policies that made the lives of Indigenous people much harder. Combine that with the issues caused by colonisation, and a lot of Indigenous people are worse off than the broader population in terms of health, wealth and education. Closing that gap has been the aim of a lot of different governments, but nothing has made a huge difference so far. And as of last year, the gap is mostly getting wider. Of all the areas being measured, just a few are on track. Some are actually going backwards. And Indigenous people are still living much shorter lives. That's where the voice comes in getting Indigenous people to have a say over what happens to them, sometimes called self-determination, is seen as one of the best ways to close the gap.
And we know from the evidence that what improves people's lives is when they get a say, and that's what this is about.
Ideas for something like a voice have been around for a long time, but this version took shape a few years ago. Let me take you back to 2017, to the Uluru National Constitutional Convention. Indigenous leaders from across the country gathered in the Red Centre to try and come up with a plan to improve the lives of their communities.
There has to be some really fundamental change in the relationship. Australia has to hear us, for goodness sake.
After days of talks, a consensus was reached on the Uluru Statement, 400-ish words that outline what Indigenous people say needs to change. The statement asks for three things: voice, treaty and truth.
It's very short on detail, but it is a very big idea.
6 years on, plenty of research and consultation has been done with communities, organisations and governments, and many believe the voice is the best compromise to deliver change for Indigenous people. This is where it landed. The voice would be a group of Indigenous people who advise governments on whether proposed policies and laws would be good or bad for their communities. And here comes the important bit. These are the 3 sentences that could be added to the Constitution in order to create a voice. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. It seems straightforward, and is what the Uluru Statement was calling for, but nothing's that easy, and this is where the debate begins. There are 2 phrases amongst all that's raised questions about the proposal, and that's make representations and executive government of the Commonwealth. For some who are arguing the no case, that gives the voice too much freedom to get involved with a whole wide range of issues. If the referendum succeeds, the voice will be enshrined in the Constitution, basically meaning it can't be disbanded or gotten rid of down the track, something that has happened to First Nations bodies in the past.
It won't be officially abolished until July, but the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission is already being stripped of its $70 million worth of assets.
What has happened in most cases, a party will appeal to the voters that it will get rid of this XYZ body because it's clear that it's not working. And that's happened, I think we reckoned 7 times in our history.
So there you go, 7 times it has not worked, and hopefully this time they get things right. But anyway, the vote is in your hand. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now, that's all we have time for in this segment. It's time to take a look at our functions and events. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you in this segment. Hey, it's been wonderful having your company as usual. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us. And don't forget.